Hello everybody, my name is Daulton Nelson, and today I'd like to give my thoughts on a game I've played enough of. That game being EatWell for the PC. EatWell is a roguelike maze game, developed by Chinese developer Spiez. I don't really know much about Spiez or EatWell, but neither does the internet. Most of what I've tried to find online is very threadbare. There are a couple of threads that Spiez has been on that has answered questions about EatWell, but that's really it. There's no GameSpot reviews or even Metacritic reviews of this game. And it's not like it's a big game either. I bought this game when it was on sale for 99 cents, but retail price on Steam is $2. I imagine the low price makes people not notice this game as much. But I specifically found this game when it was on sale and I was looking for cheap games that were interesting. So before I purchased EatWell on Steam, I looked around on the internet to see what it was all about, and it was described to me through reviews and through YouTube videos that it was a mix of Pac-Man and Binding of Isaac. And that is a very common theme if you check this game's reviews on Steam. Almost every review includes the word Pac-Man in their body. Another very interesting thing I found was that before this game was officially on the Steam store, it was part of Steam Greenlight, which means EatWell here had a community period where people voted for this game to be officially released onto the Steam platform. I just find that interesting because I can't really find anything outside of Steam forums about EatWell at all, and even within Steam forums there's very few things to go off of. So I bought this game, I've played it for about 8 hours, and I feel comfortable giving some thoughts and a review about it. And so right off the bat, before you even play the game, you might notice that this game's look and even its name are very reminiscent of the 2015 mop-in game Downwell. Downwell itself was a vertical shooter made for the PC just a couple years ago and now has been ported to a couple different devices. And it's a really fun game, but I don't know if the developers Spiez here took inspiration from that game, or they just happen to have the same art style and name. It's very weird. Even the aesthetic of vanilla Downwell, with its blacks and reds and whites, is still very present here in EatWell as well. So either Spiez was really inspired by the game, or this is a really big coincidence. Also, just like Downwell, EatWell is presented in a 4-bit aesthetic as well, with everything being very pixelated and retro looking. Aside from that, if I take the Downwell comparisons out and kind of judge this game based on what it presents, well, I would say that first, the monster designs within the game are actually pretty neat. Some of the enemies are very cute looking and very chibi, while others are very disturbing like floating eyeballs, which very much fit within the narrative theme that Spiez is trying to convey throughout this game, and we'll get to the narrative later. But another notable thing about the design of characters in this game is the main character, who is kind of just a smiley face, which is just kind of for me. Like, that's really hitting the design nail on its head, just making your good guy a smiley face. Occasionally in places like the secret rooms in this game, the color palette will expand to more than just black, red, and white. Like, there is a starry kind of secret room that has a bunch of hues in it, so it's not totally within that black, red, white aesthetic. I thought the soundtrack of this game, for the most part, served its purpose. The hub theme is pretty catchy, with a little bit of a horror-ish aesthetic to it, while themes during gameplay tend to be a bit more bassy and dank, because you are going lower and lower into this kind of hellscape that Spiez is kind of trying to build here. The soundtrack as a whole is also done in a retro aesthetic, and it is clearly inspired by some horror-themed retro games like Castlevania and Ghosts and Goblins. And EatWell, it does have a story, like I mentioned before. Here's a quote about it from the Steam page of EatWell. Quote, "A monster from hell has kidnapped your lover and sucked her blood, and now it's your job to go into the netherworld to save her from the beast." End quote. So from that premise alone, it's a pretty standard rescue the princess type narrative, nothing new for video games at all. However, you would never really get this in the game itself. There's actually very little that hints towards this. In fact, the closest you ever get to some sort of narrative is some text that appears above the hub room. Sometimes this text could be cryptic, and other times it could be very badly translated. I'd just like to remind everybody that Spiez is a Chinese developer, and so English is not their first language. And I think a lot of what they wrote in Chinese, they might have used Google Translate to put into this game, and it definitely shows. Here's some quotes that appear that I thought were pretty notable. Quote, "Always have serendipity. Sometime is surprise. Sometime is disaster." End quote. And that was not an error on my part on saying disaster. The disaster in the game is spelled D-I-S-A-D-T-E-R. And then a very simplistic quote, "Wanna props?" End quote. And so I get that bad translations and localizations are nothing new within video games, but what is newer is the wide knowledge of game design and visual literacy. And so I wish that Spiez took a bit more of a visual approach to all the text components they have in this game, whether it be in the hub, the prop descriptions, the achievement descriptions. It would have been more universal that way to just keep it more visual instead of using words. Now, I've been railing on this game for a good part of the thoughts video now, but honestly the thing that kept me playing EatWell and has got me really interested in what it's all about is the gameplay. See, I have this concept of video games, or certain types of video games that fall within a certain category, and I call these concept games. And what concept games are to me is they're very simple mechanical games that are usually just focused around one idea, and there's no real frills or additions to the gameplay at all. It's solely about that idea and that idea alone. And there are a couple of examples throughout video games that I can name as concept games. Pac-Man is a concept game. Super Mario Bros. Is a concept game. Kicks, Quarth, and EatWell too. It's very clear to me that the developer had an idea on a very cool mechanic that they wanted to execute, and so they just kind of made a game around it, put it on the Steam store, and sold it for about $2 to whoever was interested in this interesting concept. But before I get into the concept, I just want to go over kind of what you encounter first within gameplay, which in this game, it's a hub world. And this is the first thing that the player really gets to walk around in the game and get yourself familiar with. And this is the safe space where you can sit and view certain things. And so there's a very simple layout to the hub. The middle part mainly serves to give you information from that upper text that we were talking about earlier, and to go down into the hellscape in order to collect the blood pellets that were mentioned within the narrative description. There is a left room that allows you to view all the props that you can use throughout the game, and we'll get into props later and what they are all about. But it just has a grid layout of all the props, and if you walk over them, a description shows up at the top of what they do, and if it's locked, it'll show the criteria that you have to complete in order to unlock that. The right room of the hub shows all of the achievements of the game. There are 20 achievements in total, and this room acts exactly like the prop room, where you can walk over an achievement and view the criteria up at the top. And then there is the bottom room of the hub, which when you start a new game in EatWell, this is where you will start first and go through a mini tutorial of how the game works. And as you run through the game a little bit more, this bottom room turns into a zoo. And this is where all the caught monsters go, although I have no idea what that really means for the player, or even how you catch the monsters. It might be like Terraria kind of thing, like the banners, where you have to kill a certain amount of that type of enemy, and then that kill gives you something, and I guess that's in the form of a caught monster, but I have no idea if these caught monsters do anything, and the game's not really clear on telling me if they even do anything for the player at all. So moving back to the middle part of the hub, once you go down that ladder into the hellscape, a procedurally generated maze will pop up with randomly placed dots, hazards, and monsters. You, the smiley face character, always start at the bottom left corner of the maze. However, spawning for other things is truly random, which means that monsters and hazards are able to spawn right next to or on to your character. This damages you before you even start the game, and in this game that is a real disadvantage to you. Another thing that you'll see that you'll start out with is 5 hearts, which this is how many times you can be hit before you die and go right back into that hub area. There's a problem I have with how this game deals with taking damage and health, but we'll get into that later. And that's because I want to go through the concept of the game now, which is players must progress through floors of these mazes that procedurally generate by clearing out all of the red blood cell dot pellet things, whatever they're called in this game. And once you collect all of those, which is exactly like Pac-Man, you just run your character over the pellet and he or she eats it. And then once you clear all of those out, another ladder will spawn, bringing you deeper into the hellscape and bringing you closer to harder and harder challenges. And this is where most of the Pac-Man influence of EatWell truly comes in. A big part of the concept here is that the player must collect 10 dots in succession, which then nets you a diamond and a prop. And then this process, this collecting dots in succession process, can be stacked up to 30 dots in succession to get a better quality prop every 10 dots, as well as a diamond every 10 dots. And how you collect these dots in succession is that this is movement/tile based, where the chain of dots can only be broken if the player moves 2 tiles without collecting a single dot. So players would have to survey the maze quickly to see how they can pull off the best chain while simultaneously taking into account where monsters and hazards are. And I don't think I've really seen this done in a video game before, especially taking into account how Spiez is able to merge the core concept of Pac-Man with a standard roguelike structure. It's fairly interesting, although it is threadbare, but I guess that's what really tracks my creative mind when viewing this game, is that I see an interesting concept here, but it's like raw. And I see this raw concept and I can see how some creators can take this and really run with something truly unique with what's being presented here. If you were a professor at a video game design school and you gave this game to each of your students and told them to make a game based off of this game's core concept, I guarantee you each student will have a different game. And I think this is another kind of element of the concept game, where it's so simple that it kind of just begs for creativity. Unfortunately, you don't get that really here in EatWell. What you are presented is kind of just what you get. The control of EatWell is also very simple. Like Pac-Man, the only thing you can do in EatWell is move. And in fact, I think Spiez directly tried to emulate the movement of Pac-Man games, where in those games and in this game, the movement is extremely rigid with priority-based movement, and tile-based movement where a transition to a tile has to be completed before the process of moving to another tile is started. And kind of think of this like the fixed jump arc in Castlevania, right? Once you jump, you cannot change it, and it feels the same way here when you're controlling EatWell. Once you move left, you have to complete that step before you move again. And so I promise it feels a lot more fluid and natural than how I'm explaining it here, but also comparing it to some more modern, free-flowing 2D movement. This is definitely rigid and old school and definitely based on some of the analog movement of arcade cabinets like Pac-Man. So now that we've gotten kind of the concept out of the way, I'd like to go back and talk about taking damage in this game, which in this game, a lot of the difficulty comes from how easily you can take damage throughout this game. And it's all about how iframes and how the collision detection works. Because what Spiez has done here is create something that makes the player extremely fragile. So how taking damage and collision detection works within EatWell is that once your character hits an enemy or a hazard, the player is invulnerable to that damaging force for as long as both you and the force are still overlapping each other. Once either you or the force leaves that tile, your invulnerability is no more. And this kind of health system can cause the player here to become very fragile throughout the entire game and enables the player to take huge amounts of damage in a matter of frames. Not within a matter of seconds, but within a matter of frames. And for me, this is the biggest problem with EatWell, is how Spiez handled this. as not only does this contribute to EatWell's overall higher difficulty, but something like this could have easily been fixable or avoided with just an encode timer or an IE numerator that disables the ability to take damage, whether it be a boolean or collision detection, for whatever amount of time that Spiez would have set it to that they felt the player would have needed in order to escape the threat and recollect themselves and reassess the situation. And even if you say, well, this is a $2 game, they didn't want to put too much into it, to me, health is one of the easier things you could program in your game. It can get complicated later, but how it works in this game, it's actually extremely simple and easy to understand once you break it down. And so to me, this is very lazy game making and bad game design, plain and simple. I'm not moving from that stance at all. So another big part of this game, and something that contributes to a couple people comparing EatWell to Binding of Isaac, is that props are sometimes power-ups. You see, like Isaac, they always have some sort of effect, either it be on you or the environment or the enemies. However, some of the props within EatWell can just straight up harm you, and others are just a little bit cryptic on what they can do. Like there's this flower power-up that I just have no idea what it does. It just kind of acts like the leaf shield for Mega Man, but it doesn't do anything. At least I haven't found out what it does yet. And of course, these props do have descriptions within the hub. However, we went over how the bad translating and localization really doesn't help that at all, but even makes it worse. So I have a couple of other things of note here. First, when you clear 5 floors of a layer within EatWell, you face a boss, and then when you beat that boss, you go on to the next layer. This is pretty standard for roguelike games. I also found the pathfinding within the monster AI to be a little interesting. Most of the monsters in the game just use a very simple pathfinding technique of picking a certain location on the grid and then moving to that space on the grid. And that's really how most of them just kind of work. Some of them are a bit more aggressive, as the location they can set for themselves can always be you. Other times, some of the enemies can shoot projectiles that can do things like spawn fire, they could invert your controls, they could even blind the player and make a majority of the screen just black. Also within this game, they have these kind of secret rooms, which there's a very low chance that you will actually kill enemies in this game, but if you ever do so, their death usually triggers a spawn of a heart, a diamond, or one of 4 types of keys. You've got like the dot key that spawns a room that sometimes has stuff in it, although I don't really know what these do or what these are for. There is a shop key that spawns a shop, and then you can go in there and there's like a selection of 3 props that you could buy from that all cost like 5 diamonds. There's a monster key that spawns a room full of monsters, and if you kill all of them, which you are actually given a prop that can kill all of them in these kinds of rooms, if you do so, the result could be getting a very higher quality of prop or many different props. And then there is a random key that cycles through those 3 types of rooms. And so when you enter that door, you really don't know what you're going to get. And kind of ending off the gameplay segment, I did mention that props have a quality. And what this is that props are rated with stars. And how it works is they are ranked 1 star through 3 star. 1 star being the lowest quality of prop, and this will be usually something very simple like a key or a heart or something like that. And a 3-star prop will be the highest quality and will have the most complex functionality, and sometimes even the most helpful functionality. Although, as I said, there are some props within the pool that just kind of harm you or just cause a random effect, which I don't really like that. So to conclude my thoughts on EatWell, I like it. As a creator, I think the concept is interesting, and plus with the quick playthroughs, it did really keep me playing. There are a lot of flaws to this game. It is way too similar to the game Daulton. It is too easy to take damage. There are bad translation issues everywhere, and I found the roguelike elements within the game to be very bare bones and standard. I'd give EatWell a final score of a 6 out of 10. I honestly will keep playing this game because I kind of want to learn about some of the things that I still don't understand. But I think that if you consider that EatWell here is just $2 on Steam, which is a very cheap price for a video game, I'd say it's worth that, and I think that above everything else, even above the neat concept, is why I give this a 6, is because it's very easy to just give this a shot. It's a quick, interesting, but threadbare concept game that has a lot of flaws, but I think can interest you a lot as well. So that concludes my review on the roguelike maze game EatWell by Spiez. If you like this video, like, comment, or subscribe. I also have my social media links and Portfolium account down in the description below that you can check out. That's all I have to say. Have a nice day.